Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national broadcaster Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and major regional and global developments that have an impact on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are doing a deep dive into the relationship between two of India's neighbors, which is highly troubled, conflict prone and problematic. This is Afghanistan and Pakistan. These two countries share a long border known as the Durand Line, which is 2,640 kilometers long, and have been intensifying clashes across this border over territorial claims and also many other disputes that have accumulated historically. So, why are Afghanistan and Pakistan at loggerheads? What is the implication of this fight for India and for the world at large? These are the themes we're taking up in this episode. And to talk us through this important topic, I have with me a very appropriate guest who is actually one of India's leading specialists on the Pakistan-Afghanistan region, Tilak Devasher. Tilak Devasher ji is a well-known author and commentator and a close monitor of what has been happening in these badlands of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Tilak ji, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Tilak ji, as we speak, the tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan have been mounting steadily, and there have been major casualties on both sides, fighting across the Durand Line, and it's quite obvious that something has gone wrong with this relationship at a very deep level, and we are only seeing manifestations of it now and then it calms down, and again you see another round of violence. So the question is, what happened to the whole projection of Pakistan as having won the war in Afghanistan in 2021? Because when the Taliban took over power in Kabul, it was declared that as a major victory for Pakistan, because the Taliban had been sheltered, nurtured and financed by the Pakistani military establishment. But 4 years down the line, we are seeing the fault lines between Afghanistan and Pakistan widening. So, and Afghanistan is fighting back very fiercely and taking Pakistani prisoners and killing lots of Pakistani soldiers. So, what went wrong with this whole strategic depth for Pakistan? This was supposed to be a great moment of triumph in terms of regional geopolitics for Pakistan, but it has backfired badly. So, please take our audiences through why Pakistan failed to capitalize on this big moment in 2021 and why things have been going adrift in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes. So, let's just unwind a little bit. When Pakistan supported the Taliban for 20 years, when they were pushed out of power by the United States in 2001, Pakistan supported them for 20 years. Pakistan had presumed that the Taliban in Kabul would fulfill 3 of their main strategic concerns. First, the Taliban would push out India from Kabul. Second, the Taliban would recognize the Durand Line. And third, the Taliban would defang the TTP. 6 months after August 21, Pakistan began to realize that none of these objectives are going to be met. India was invited back into Kabul, and if you remember, we opened up a technical office in June 2021, in 22, to facilitate the aid that we had given. So India was back, and the Taliban said that we'll provide you security. Second, the Taliban refused to recognize the Durand Line and said it's a line that divides brothers. In fact, at places they even pulled out the fencing. And third, the Taliban made it very clear that they cannot take any action against the TTP. At best, they will facilitate the talks of the TTP with Pakistan, arrange a ceasefire, but it is Pakistan's problem, and Pakistan has to resolve it itself. Now, the reason for that is the Pashtun code or Pashtun Wali. When the Taliban were pushed out in 2001, they sought shelter and sanctuary with the in the tribal areas. Now, those tribesmen today are organized under the banner of the TTP. As per Pashtun Wali, if you have taken refuge with somebody, and if in the future date that person wants refuge and sanctuary, you cannot deny it. Otherwise, you will be treated or called a bagarat, man without honor, which is the worst slur for the Pashtuns. So the Taliban made it very clear that there is no way we are going to take action against the TTP. It's your problem. These are your people. You talk to them and you sort it out. So on all these three parameters, which Pakistan had placed great hope that the Taliban and Kabul would strengthen their security. Actually, the Taliban and Kabul have weakened Pakistan's security. That's why these tensions are taking place.
Right. I mean, it's a Frankenstein gone out of control, or maybe it was also not exactly a patron-client relationship even before the fall of Kabul in 2021. These are all things for history to judge. Tilakji, you already mentioned the fact that the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the Pakistani Taliban is Pakistan's problem. And I think the Taliban in Afghanistan have a valid point there. If you take the TTP and also what they call the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is a non-violent civil society movement inside Pakistan in the federally administered tribal areas and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, you find that Pakistan has been waging a lot of military operations time and again to quote-unquote pacify these regions and to reduce the resistance to Pakistani state's control over these places. But as has been the case for centuries, they are not willing to be easily subsumed, it seems, under the writ of the Pakistani state. So Pakistan, scorched earth tactics, aerial bombardment, they're doing all kinds of things against their own citizens, these Pashtuns, but are not able to subdue them. So let's talk a bit about what's happening on the Pakistani side of the Pashtun areas on the eastern side of the Durand Line. Why is Pakistan repeatedly failing to win over, co-opt, or to crush, be it the PTM or the TTP?
So let's discuss these two organizations separately. Now, see the area and terrain where the TTP operates from, the former federally administered tribal area, especially north and south Waziristan, is a highly mountainous terrain. Now, the people staying there are born in the hills. They know the hills like the back of their hands, mountains. For the Pakistan Army, which is used to or trained in conventional warfare, finds it very difficult to operate in this terrain, guerrilla warfare, or to tackle with the TTP. Therefore, though they have launched several military operations, they have not been successful. Only one time when they had some success was Zarb-e-Azb, which they started after the Peshawar school massacre. At that time, they succeeded to push the TTP out of FATA and into Afghanistan, and they hid in the hills and mountains of Afghanistan. But thereafter, they were brought back. Whether it was on Imran Khan, and they keep saying that keep blaming each other, that who actually brought them back after the Taliban had taken over control in 2021. But now they are back in their strongholds and they are spread all over. And Pakistan today lacks the capacity, the military capacity, and even the military wherewithal and the will to go after them in a Zarb-e-Azb-like operation. So they are looking to Afghanistan. They say they are India-backed, all those kind of things. But the fact of the matter is that the Pakistan military today is weakened. It does not have the resources, financial or otherwise, to directly take the TTP head on like they had done in the early 2000s during Zarb-e-Azb. Now, PTM is a civil rights movement. They came to the fore basically as a protest that we don't want to be treated as cannon fodder. We have done enough fighting to push Pakistan's foreign policy objectives. You've treated us for jihad, treated us as cannon fodder, no more. Let the Punjabis have an opportunity also to gain Jannat. We don't want to do it anymore. And because they are a peaceful movement, Pakistan Army finds it very difficult to deal with them. This is the same thing happened in Bangladesh. Pakistan Army did not know how to deal with Mujibur Rahman because it was a mass movement, peaceful. They have only one template. Anybody who raises his head, bash it. Like the famous saying that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
But for a peaceful movement who are protesting and saying we want the same rights under the constitution that the Punjabis or the Sindhis enjoy. So the Pakistan Army doesn't know how to tackle that. So with the PTM, is a different kind of problem that the Pakistan army faces. But it's so short-sighted of the army that they could have easily co-opted the PTM if they really wanted to have peace in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But perhaps strife in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa suits the army rather than to have peace over there. And now they've got two enemies. They've got the PTM and they've got the TTP on this side of the Durand Line. And then, of course, the PTI government is in power and the PTI doesn't like the army. They have problems with each other. And on the other side is the Taliban. So what Pakistan is faced with is currently a Pashtun pincer from both sides of the Durand Line. The Taliban don't accept the Durand Line. The TTP doesn't accept the Durand Line. The PTM has been a bit ambivalent about the Durand Line. But basically, no Pashtun accepts division of Pashtun territories by a line drawn up by the British in 1893. And if you like, I can give you why the Afghans don't think that Durand Line exists anymore. I mean, maybe later on, if you can ask a question on the Durand Line, I'll tell you why the Afghans think this line no longer exists.
Absolutely. Let's go there, Tilakji. You have written a very well-regarded book, The Pashtuns, A Contested History. And you have argued that the Pashtun people comprise one of the largest ethnic group without a state. There are about 60 to 70 million Pashtuns altogether in the world, mainly in that region. And they have been, unhappy with the Durand Line and do not accept it. So, given the weakness of Pakistan that you're talking about and the ineffectiveness of its military, which is increasingly being humiliated by these guerrilla groups, the question is, are we going to see some kind of a Pashtunistan finally being created, or even a greater Afghanistan that takes over some parts of Western Pakistan altogether and, ultimately, annexes those territories? I mean, of course, Pakistan is conventionally stronger than Afghanistan and economically better, but, given the weaknesses of the Pakistan military and the mistakes and the fundamental errors they make in policy, do you think there is a chance of any balkanization or in a medium to long terms, Pakistan even breaking up or losing territory?
So, there are two parts. I'll talk first about the Durand Line. Why the Afghans don't consider it an international border. This is the last treaty between British India and the King of Afghanistan was the 1921 Treaty of Kabul. Now, this had a very interesting clause which said that the treaty is valid for 3 years. And after 3 years, any of the two sides, that is British India or Afghanistan, could rescind it after giving 1 year's notice. Right? Now, when Pakistan was created in 1947, they did not write any letters talking about the Durand Line, getting the Afghan government to accept it. The Afghan government refused to recognize the Pakistan in the United Nations, saying this is a new country. It cannot accept the treaties and liabilities of the colonial power. With our treaties with India, if anything, we need to discuss this with India. Then it happened in 1949. The Pakistani aircraft entered Afghan airspace and fired at a few villages. The Afghan government called a Loya Jirga in 1949. And that Loya Jirga rescinded all the treaties. As per the 1921 treaty, they rescinded the Durand Line, they rescinded the 1879 Treaty of Gandamak, Treaty of Rawalpindi, everything. So as far as the Afghans are concerned, there is no international boundary between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And no Afghan government, every Afghan government has stood on this principle. So whether it was a monarchy under Zahir Shah, the Republican government under Dawood, the communists, the Mujahideen, the Taliban, Hamid Karzai, Ghani and Taliban now, nobody has accepted the Durand Line. They said there is no line. There is no international boundary. The boundary that we had was with British India and that expired in 1949. So that is one part of it. Pakistan's policy has been to get some Afghan government to accept the Durand Line as an international border. They thought that Taliban would be their best bet. But thrice in Taliban 1.0, they raised this issue and Mullah Omar told them to get out. This time again, they've asked the Taliban 2.0 to recognize it. And again, they've been told, sorry, this is not our decision, it was a decision for the people of Pakistan. So again, they have rejected it. So that's the Durand Line. And Pakistan knows that their western frontier is vulnerable because Afghanistan has not accepted it. And if Afghanistan is strong tomorrow, if it has international backing, it can well claim all the territories up to Atak.
Right.
And this is where your other question comes in about Pashtunistan.
Yeah.
Afghanistan is weak today. It is not in a position to challenge Pakistan. It is not in a position without international support to be able to look. That's one part of it. And secondly, they have no vision. Whether it's a greater Pashtunistan, greater Afghanistan, they have to articulate all these things in a concrete plan of action.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of uncertainty out there. Tilakji, talking of international support, I mean, one of the most striking things has been the Taliban warming up to India, and we have seen an effort to improve our working relations with the Taliban government based on the ground reality that they control Afghanistan. And after all, it's a neighbor. And we do need to invest in that region and to have influence there. So, the fact that Pakistan-Afghanistan relations are, plunging, and the fact that Afghanistan is reaching out to India and is inviting India to come in as a major development partner for economic projects and all that does look like a case of, my enemy's enemy is my friend, as Kautilya would put it. So, at that level, what is the support that India could potentially give to the Taliban government in Afghanistan as it tries to hold its own against a relatively more powerful Pakistan? And the Pakistanis have always claimed that India is behind the TTP and that India is funding and arming the TTP. It's not even during the Hamid Karzai period or the Ashraf Ghani, go back in time, they have been accusing India of quote unquote trying to break apart Pakistan on its western front. So how much of this, statecraft is actually happening in your estimate, and what is the India factor in the Pakistan-Afghanistan rivalry?
You see, the fact of the matter is that India and Afghanistan have centuries-old relationship. Right? In fact, there's an old Indian saying that he who would be emperor in Delhi must first control Kabul. There's an old saying. Simply because all invasions of India, right from the time of the Persians and Alexander, had to come through Afghanistan. Right? It was only the British who came via the sea. Therefore, anybody who was ruling in Delhi or in Punjab had to make sure that there was a friendly power in Kabul. Today, it's not a question of control. It's a question of trade routes. It's a question of ensuring that the open spaces in Afghanistan are not used by Pakistan-based or Pakistan-supported India-specific terrorists like the Lashkar and the Jaish. Therefore, for India, a strong relationship with Afghanistan is very important. You can't change geography. See, the Taliban may have been upset, or we may have our differences with the Taliban since 2021. But look, within 4 years, the Taliban are back and talking to us. Because it is a natural compulsion of any power in Kabul, like compulsion for any power in Delhi, for the two of us to come closer together. Right? So this is a natural progression. Right now, we are building trust. I think we are also going a step by step. Humanitarian assistance, even at the worst of times, India provided humanitarian assistance. We provided wheat, 50,000 tons of wheat, about 300 tons of medicines. We provided COVID vaccines. Despite all the what was happening and because Taliban at that time were beholden to Pakistan. Despite that, we have provided. And now that Pakistan-Taliban relations have deteriorated to the point of hostilities, it is far easier for us to have a direct bilateral contact with the Taliban and talk to them directly. And I think the visit of Amir Khan Muttaqi, the foreign minister, has been very useful in that respect. I think two of the most important things that were during the visit for me was first the EAM saying that we are contiguous neighbors. He made a very pointed reference to contiguous neighbors, hinting that as a Wakhan corridor and the illegally occupied area by Pakistan of J&K is 106 kilometers. That's one. And secondly, in the joint statement, Afghanistan accepted that the Pahalgam attack in Jammu and Kashmir, India, this is what has got Pakistan very upset. They called the Afghan ambassador and they said, how can you say this? It is the UN, all that kind of spiel that they normally give.
Right.
But these are very significant statements that were made in the joint statement.
Right.
And the fact, that we are friends and close friends and all that. So I think this is a very, very good and strong beginning that India and Afghanistan have re-established their strong relationship.
Absolutely. It's an opportune time, and the tide is turning. Viewers, Tilakji, last question. What about the other regional, extra-regional players? I mean, the Russians have recognized the Taliban government, the only country in the world to formally recognize Taliban government in Afghanistan. There are calls that others should do, that India should also do, follow suit. The Chinese are negotiating with the Taliban to extend the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, as a tripartite thing. So, and then of course the US wants the Bagram Air Base back, and President Donald Trump has been publicly calling for, bringing the US back into Afghanistan. So these regional players, historically people talked in terms of the great game and great powers competing and vying for influence over this pivotal geopolitical region of where Afghanistan is today. So what is your assessment of these players? And in the context of Pakistan-Afghanistan rivalry and enmity that is getting worse, what is the role of these external players? They're all, uttering, platitudes like we want it to stop and we can mediate and we can bring both parties together and so on. But what are the real interests? Briefly, Russia, China, and the US.
You see, as you mentioned, Afghanistan is a very important piece of geography. It connects so many different parts. Of the world, of Asia, North Asia, South Asia, West Asia, East Asia. It's pivotal, it's over there. So everybody wants to have access to it, to have good relationship. For Russia, a big danger has been the ISIS. And it would look to the Taliban to make sure that the ISIS is crushed. For China, again, it's a problem that Uyghurs don't get sanctuary and training in Afghanistan. They also have bid for the copper mine, Tesainik. And I'm not sure about CPEC being extended to Afghanistan. After all, where is the sea route? It's a landlocked country. They'll find it difficult to build a train. So that's in the future. But China's interest is both economic as well as in for the Uyghurs. Indian interest, of course, as I mentioned, is critical. And the US wants to come back to Bagram. Why did they then leave it? This is something, how do they think that Afghanistan is going to hand over Bagram on a platter? Or does the US want to fight for another 20 years to get hold of Bagram? I think it's very unlikely. I think it's more a bargaining chip. In the recent Moscow format meeting, all the regional players said that the re-entry of any extra regional power or to set up a military base will be destabilizing. And they all opposed it unitedly. So did India. Right. So I think the US is going to have a very difficult time. The Taliban have said nothing of the sort. There's no way that we're going to give you even an inch of territory.
Right.
So the US may try.
Yeah.
I think US could also be looking at if Afghanistan has strategic minerals. I mean, the point is, if it had, then for 20 years, what were they doing? They were 20 years in Afghanistan. Yeah. And suddenly they have woken up to the realization that Afghanistan may have strategic minerals.
Yeah, maybe it's a Trump thing more because he's interested in, gaining something concrete and very materialistic from every bargain. But I think the point is well taken. Viewers, this interesting conversation with Tilak Devasher ji is showing that, Afghanistan is coveted by a lot of players. But the point is they're also very fierce and they have their own cultural code of honor and so on, because of which they have ethnic linkages across the border in Pakistan. And these, culture is thick. And the point is, this is not going to go away. And even if Pakistan wishes to try and crush and dismantle the insurgency and the civil society movements of the Pashtuns, is not possible. So what role the outside countries play right now is going to be critical. They may be able to tilt the balance in favor of Afghanistan and may actually create a genuine balance of power between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We don't know how much, what will happen with territory and how much land Pakistan can sustain and control. But Pakistan has lost land before in 1971, and we cannot rule out further breakup as it commits major blunders. India is, of course, playing its own interests and its own cards, and India will be keen to not to miss the geostrategic, scenario, which could go to its disadvantage going in the future. So we are very, very agile now, and going forward, I'm sure we will grab the strategic opportunities. Let me thank Tilak Devasher ji. Thank you for your scholarship and your work, and for illuminating so many nuanced things about this rather less understood region. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Sreeram. Very nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Viewers, Afghanistan versus Pakistan, this is going to be a long contest. It's more than a cricket match between these two countries, which is also very hotly contested. It's more than a territorial dispute. It's ultimately about the nature of the regimes in these two countries, and also the will of the people, of the Pashtun people in particular. So India will be very keen to make sure that it has its presence and its footprint back in Afghanistan, and so that we are able to control the menace of terrorism and also have access to the trade routes to Central Asia and beyond. So we will be closely watching and monitoring the situation, but also making sure that when there is a geopolitical opportunity, we will try to exploit it as per our core national interests. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.